got the little definition. Alright, so this sheet is just some upcoming dates, okay, for things. Especially in 2 weeks, November 4th, we're going to have the sponsored class at 7:15. And then Sunday, December 2nd, would be that first ceremony, that first liturgical rite. Now, just a word about that December 2nd event. It's optional, okay? Some of you may be here just kind of feeling things out, learning more about the Catholic faith. You may not be ready on December 2nd to kind of go down to the church and be welcomed into this process sort of formally. Maybe you're just not ready for that yet, and that's totally fine. So I want you just to know December 2nd is very much encouraged for those of you who are ready to be welcomed as a candidate or as a catechumen or as a confirmandi. I think you guys are involved as well. But if you're not ready for that yet, it's okay. Okay, so it's just an optional ceremony, which it doesn't really matter if you miss it, but it's really nice for the community to see you guys, to see you sort of thinking about what's happening. Okay? So, well, no problem. What's your name?
Alexis.
Alexis, okay. We're sending the kind of the roll sheet around, so if that missed you, we'll try to get it back to you, okay? All right, so any questions about December 2nd, that night? We would like everyone who wants to be involved in that to have their sponsor there as well at that event, okay? So please notify your sponsors of those 2 dates, November 4th and December 2. Oh, the showers, well, that was Mass.
It was beautiful.
Very good, very good. Okay. With that said, as you see, we're now in a little bigger space, which is kind of nice. We get a little tight over there in that other room, so this is a lot nicer. And we will, I think that's it for our announcements. So let's stand and we'll say our prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit, amen. Almighty God, unto whom all hearts be open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid, cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy holy name, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Grant me grace, O merciful God, to desire ardently all that is pleasing to thee, to examine it prudently, to acknowledge it truthfully, and to accomplish it perfectly, for the praise and glory of thy name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so be seated. So tonight we have quite a large topic, really 3 topics, and we could spend, well, yeah, as usual, most of these topics themselves should be considered a course. So you could take an entire course on creation, an entire course on the human person, on man, and an entire course on original sin. Maybe the last one would be tough for me to make that into an entire course. But anyways, lots of stuff to cover. Lots of stuff. And it's a great topic. So tonight we're going to go over creation, man, and original sin. Okay. And first thing to note is that we are all here. We are here. We are living, breathing, for the most part. We're alive. And we notice that we're not the only ones. The other people around us, there's other things around us. And it's not by chance. It's not by chance. You created all things, and by your will, they were created and have their being. So creation is through the will of God. Through the will of God, creation took place. It's not a chance occurrence. And each one of us is the same way. Each one of us is willed by God. Each one of us is created, is an intentional thought of God. Really from all eternity. All eternity, we were thought of by God. And we came into existence at a certain point in time. Everyone has a birthday, everyone knows their birthday. Some people actually don't know their birthday, but they still have one. And they're created. Okay, so creation. This is a critical topic for us. And it's one of my favorite topics. Because, well, I love creation. And it's all around us, right? It's a beautiful topic and a critical one. Because today, there is somewhat of a threat to creation. We value, what? By we, I mean, you could say culture at large, especially American culture. We value something more than creation, and that is freedom. That is freedom, right? We have reached a point with our freedom that we can decide things that we never could really decide before. That we can decide and have a lot of control about birth. There's lots of ways now to produce offspring that in earlier generations didn't exist. So the creation of life, right, can take place, a human life can take place in a petri dish. Right? It can take place in ways which involve our freedom more than in generations past. And same thing with death, right? Even though, as far back as the first pages of the Bible, human people have been killing other people, like Cain and Abel. But today, we have even more mastery over death. We can sort of administer death in a very sterile, sort of quiet fashion. There's the phenomena of euthanasia, right? And it's allowed, right? There's certain places where you can sort of decide in your own freedom, I no longer wish to live, and have a type of a systematic way to make that happen. So this is a critical topic because of the threats to creation. Right? Even Pope Francis says this is the age of sins against the Creator. This is the age of sins against the Creator. Which is kind of a bold statement. Now the image shows us the Christian view of creation. That creation is good. This is from a church in Rome called San Clemente. And this is the apse. So above the altar is the apse. Last week, all the showers spoke a lot about the churches. This is one part of the church. And I love it because you have Jesus in the middle on the cross. Right? But all around him, you see the vines sort of coming out basically right from his body. Right? And then down below all of the lambs. So it's an affirmation of the goodness of creation. Right? Our artwork that we use, and that we would put natural elements, at least pictures of them, into a church. Right? We don't just put biblical figures. We don't just put words, not just scripture quotes, but actually that we include sort of natural things into our worship, into our churches. Right? That's just a beautiful sign of our belief in the goodness of creation. Okay, but as I said, there's a threat to creation, and that is man's freedom. So here's two quotes. The first will quote Benedict. In the technological world, the self-made world of man, one does not immediately encounter the Creator. Rather, initially, it is only himself that he encounters. Right? And we're surrounded by things made with human effort, right? For the most part. Right? It's a little different sitting in here than it is sitting in a woods. Right? I mean, if we're out in the woods, we'd be trying to listen to class, right? Spot mosquitoes, right? And, who knows what else would be going on, right? So there's something really good about technology and human art, human work. But at the same time, it does distance us from our Creator, right? And we know that every once in a while it's nice just to get out in the woods, right? To be around things which are made not by our hands, right? But which are sort of given in creation. Right? But freedom has been exalted to such an extent in our country that in 1992, in a very famous Supreme Court case, the justice said, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Freedom so powerful, so reaching into our lives that we can decide it, even the meaning of our life, even of the universe. Now, the Christian view of creation pushes against this exalted view of freedom. Right? Because we would say even our freedom is created. Even our freedom is a part of creation. Right? So the central theme in the Bible about creation is this. We are not God. We did not make ourselves, and we do not rule the universe. We are limited. We are limited. We are limited to the extent that we cannot determine the meaning of everything. Some things are given to us, right? Especially the meaning of the universe. Right? We are not God. We did not make ourselves. We do not rule the universe. We are limited. Right? In the scriptures, right, it's always God. God is the one who knows. Man is the one who doesn't know, who is searching for truth, searching for answers. Now, in the Bible itself, there are various accounts of creation. And there's different places in here where it says, this is how creation took place. Right? You may be thinking that it only says that in where? What book? What's the famous book that speaks about creation? Genesis, right? But there's actually other places in the Bible where it speaks about creation. Right? Genesis isn't the only one. All right? In the Psalms, it speaks about creation. The prophet Isaiah speaks about the creation of the world. All right? Also in the wisdom literature, especially in Sirach, right? Some parts of the Bible. And it's very interesting that in the Bible, there are different ways of speaking about creation. Right? How does Genesis speak of creation? How many days does it take? 6 days. And then God did what on the seventh day? He rested. That's the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1. Right? But in other places, like in the wisdom literature, it doesn't speak of 6 days. It just says God spoke. God created all things through His Word. Now this is because in the Bible, creation is a very important topic, but the Bible itself reflects the historical circumstances that it was in. Okay? Because you see this when you compare the wisdom literature to Genesis, okay? Right, in the wisdom literature, the historical environment was that the Jews were in conversation with the Greeks. Right? So they didn't use the 6-day formula. Right? They used something else. But in Genesis, that book of Genesis was written in conversation with the Mesopotamians. And they had this great myth about creation taking place over 6 days. And so the Jewish authors wanted to use their historical environment to actually work against the 6-day story of the Mesopotamians. We'll get into that. Right? But the main point I want to make is that the Bible, there's tons of history in the Bible. Right? And you have a little bit of a timeline of things. But the actual authoring of the Bible, the dating of certain works in here, they don't correspond to the timeline. Alright, so, the book of Genesis, you might think that's the first book of the Bible, right? So that was written first. Right? Isn't that the oldest text? But it's actually not. And there's other texts that are older. That one just speaks about the beginning. Right? So here is this little timeline. Right? When you get to this point of the captivity, the exile, it was in those days that the Jews reflected on creation. It's when they encountered other people who had other stories about creation that they decided they needed to write down their own account of creation. Okay? I just want to throw you into that idea of the Bible as something historical, right, in interactions with other cultures. Right? Because there's tons of stories about the creation of the world. There's tons of them. Right? And one of the most famous is written by the Mesopotamian culture. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. And the Jews came into contact with that culture. Right? They said, oh my goodness, there's some things that are really weird about how you guys think the world was created. Right? This is a little bit off. Right? So we're going to kind of work to correct that. We're going to come up with our own accounts. Okay? And that's what we get in the book of Genesis. Right? Genesis chapter 1 through 3. Okay? Which is a really, really awesome account of creation. We're going to read it tonight. So everyone brought their Bible, right? Got the phone. All right. Try to bring a Bible, okay, next time. Because we're really going to try to use more of the scriptures straight right in class, okay? Right. So the exile is a fruitful time of reflection. Right. Israel is pushed away from their land, but in those days they come to understand that God is the creator of all lands. Okay. All right, so there's various accounts of creation in the Bible. The most famous is in Genesis. Okay. Now, creation. Beyond the natural knowledge that every man can have of the Creator, God progressively revealed to Israel the mystery of creation. Right? We mentioned this in our first classes, right? That we can know by reason alone, without God's help, that there is a Creator. There's a first mover. Right? That's our natural knowledge of God. We know that by reason alone. Right? But God knew that we needed more help. Right? So within Revelation, right, within God working through the Israelites, He began to reveal more about creation. Right? He didn't leave us with only our natural knowledge. Right? So what we have here about creation is inspired. It's God's here, let me give you a few more details about things. Let me show you more about how creation took place and the meaning of creation. God progressively revealed to Israel the mystery of creation. And it's very important that we study about creation. Not only that we study what Scripture says about creation, but that we study science, that we study creation itself, right? Because it reveals God more and more to us. I think I mentioned in one of the first classes, the theology of the two books, right? There's the book of Scripture and the book of, you don't remember? The book of Scripture and the book of nature. Right? And both of these together help us know who God is. They reveal to us who God is. Okay, all right, this is the moment. This is the supreme moment. Get out our Bibles. Okay, so Genesis 1 through 3. All right, the very, very first page of the Bible. As I mentioned, these texts remain the principal source of catechesis on the mysteries of the beginning, the creation, the fall, and the promise of salvation. Right? So what do you typically hear about Genesis? Right? What is one thing you've heard about? Anyone can just shout out.
Everyone likes to argue that it's actually 7 days long.
Right? Was it really 24 hours times 6? Is that really how it happened? Okay, that's very good. That's one thing you hear. What else? Like maybe that's just for the crazy creationists, right? Creationism. There's an ism that goes with it. I think it's a creation museum in Kentucky or something. Never been. Anyone been there? I know for certain that Catholics do not go to that museum. Right, but it's a legitimate question, right? Is this textbook or is it poetry? Is it just a myth? Does it actually mean something? Now, the church has said that Genesis is not meant to report scientific data. Right? The important thing about Genesis is that it communicates truth, right? But it communicates the truth on the level of meaning. This is the meaning of creation. There's nothing the church has said which would prevent you from believing that there's actually just 6 24-hour periods which God uses to create. But it's certainly allowed that you can read that symbolically. It's symbolic. The Genesis creation narratives communicate to us the meaning of creation, what it means that God created. But we make a distinction between form and content. The content is not scientific data about the creation of the world. The content is the meaning of creation. Right? And the other thing is it just a myth? Is it just a myth like all the other myths of creation that were out there? What sets it apart? What makes it different than the other ones? Okay? And we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, now we're actually going to read Genesis 1. We're going to, actually, I'll probably just read, you guys just listen. But it's a beautiful text to read, right? And this is a little outline of Genesis 1. Okay, so I just want to throw this out there to help us maybe just pay attention as we go along. All right, so days 1 through 3, God forms the creation. Days 4 through 6, God sort of fills it, right? And you'll see this as we go along. All right, so I'm going to read Genesis 1. And I'm going to read it because it's meant to be read. It's meant to be a liturgical text. It's meant to be listened to. And you're supposed to go like, ooh, ah, like, yeah. Like that's really how it's written. Okay, so we're gonna do that. Like a little poetry slam here. Okay? So let's do this. Okay? In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening, there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on the earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, fourth day. All right, so we're tracking. Day 4, a couple more to go. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. And let the birds above the earth of the dome, and let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth." There was evening, there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of every earth of every kind." It was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with its seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. To every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps upon the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." It was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, there was morning, the sixth day. Wow, isn't that beautiful? Right. that is the 6 days of creation, right? The Genesis narrative. Okay? Now, it's not the only narrative that there is. Right? There's another one in chapter 2. Right? You may have heard of that one. And so a quick summary of these two creation accounts. Right? The first one focuses on God's action. Right? God is the principal character. God saw it was good. God created. Right? And as I mentioned, this is a liturgical text. It's meant to be read and listened to. Now, chapters 2 and 3, there's another account of creation. It focuses more on the human person, right? On what makes up the human person. Right? God formed man from the dust of the earth and blew the breath of life into his nostrils. Okay? So it's not that they're rival accounts, they're just different. And actually, the one in chapter 1 is a newer text than chapter 2, if that makes sense. So chapter 2 is actually old. Chapter 1 is a little newer as far as the history of the text. Right? But they go together. Right? The first chapter is about God's action. The second chapter focuses on the end of God's action, which is the human person. Right? The high point of creation. Right? Everything was good until what? The human person. And they're very good. They're very good. Okay, now, as I mentioned, it's important that we touch on another account of creation that's not Christian, but it's very important to talk about. And, well, what is it? Well, it's a myth from the Mesopotamian culture, as I mentioned before. Okay? And this helps explain to us the uniqueness of Genesis and sort of the genius of Genesis. Right? Why is Genesis written the way it is? What does it tell us about God's creation? Right? So as I mentioned before, what I just read to you, the 6 days of creation, was composed in response to something. In response to this myth of Enuma Elish, right? Which was a myth of creation which took place. I'm not sure if it was 6 days or it was like written on 6 tablets or 6 something, right? And the main difference, there's lots of differences, but the main one is that creation was out of chaos. Right? Out of chaos. Right? So in the picture, you have two gods. On the right is Marduk, on the left is